it is now that time where we're going to start talking about the neuromuscular system. So we're going to get into things like properties of muscle fibers and how action potentials happen. So I like to remember the properties of muscle fibers by the term ICEEC. So I standing for irritability. So muscles have the ability to respond to stimuli. They're extremely irritable. So muscles respond to basically anything like, for example, a pinprick to your finger. You're going to remove your hand. So they respond to stimuli. Contractibility. They refer to the muscle being able to shorten. So for example, when I do a bicep curl, it can contract. Muscles are also very elastic, so they can stretch and then they can return back to their normal position. Extensibility, they can extend in length. So for example, when you put your arm straight out in a bicep curl. And lastly, conductivity refers to the muscle transmitting nerve impulses. So my brain can tell my foot to kick a soccer ball. I can tell myself to remove my finger from a pinprick, things like that. So they can transmit nerve impulses. The neuromuscular junction is kind of a technical thing that we want to talk about. The N on the end of axon should be moved up. So what happens is your brain sends a signal and it goes down the spinal cord, down the axon, and when it gets to the end, it gets to a thing called the axon terminal. And in the axon terminal, a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, is released. So ACH is the scientific term for acetylcholine, and that's a neurotransmitter for muscular contraction. So you need ACH in order for muscles to contract. Now the sarcolemma, top of the muscle there. So what happens is your brain sends a signal, it goes down the axon terminal, and once it gets to the axon terminal, it releases a neurotransmitter called ACH. That's what causes muscles to contract. So once it hits the synaptic cleft, it's starting to release ACH, and there's these little receptor cells on the sarcolemma that are going to take it in. There you can see the look at a motor unit. So you have the cell body, and then the dendrites are on the end, and then the axon hillock. This is the direction of the action potential. Now, on that you have these little things here called myelin sheath, and you can see it kind of better here. And the job of the myelin sheath is to speed up the action potential. So speeds up. Speeds up the action potential. And then when it gets to the end, you're now at the motor end plate, and that's where the muscle fiber is. So that's what a motor unit looks like. Now we're going to take a look at the anatomy of the skeletal muscle. So first we're going to take a look at it looking outward. So you've got your perimysium, which binds all the muscle fibers together. So each little one of these things are muscle fiber. So the perimysium binds them all together there. The epimysium is the sheath enveloping the entire muscle. So the epimysium is doing that entire muscle there. And you can also see it here. If we were looking inward at a muscle though, it would look a little different. So you'd see the endomysium. It's got each individual muscle fiber, so I'll just try and get a picture of that there for you. That's your endomysium. And then when we take a look at the sarcolemma contains the cytoplasm or the sarcoplasm. So you may have heard those terms before in biology. And then we've got the myofibrils or the myofibrils, and they are the things that contain actin and myosin. So you can kind of see within each muscle fiber there's little dots. So one of these little dots, if it were to come out, and then there's little dots here, oh, it's connected there, all these little dots in that muscle fiber, those are what are called myofibrils, and they contain actin and myosin. If you remember back to biology, actin is the thin filament and myosin is the thick. If you've never taken biology before, don't worry, we'll kind of take it slow. So each sarcomere contains actin and myosin. So here you can take a picture of it looking from a lateral view. So there's the tendon of the muscle. And remember, a tendon attaches muscle to bone. So here's the muscle, that's your muscle belly. Then you've got your epimysium surrounding all of the muscle fibers. And then your perimysium surrounding each individual muscle fiber. So a small little muscle fiber by itself, it's completely enclosed by what's called your sarcolemma. And within that, you have a network of tubules called the endoplasmic reticulum. Within the endoplasmic reticulum, those tiny little dots there, those are your myofibrils or your myofibrils. Your myofibrils come out into what's called your sarcomere. And then the sarcomere is divided into the thick filament and the thin. Thick, remember, was your myosin head, and your thin filament was your actin head. So kind of goes from big to small here, big being this, and then getting all the way till you get to your actin and myosin. So we're going to talk about how those contract in a minute here. Muscles are attached to bone by two ways. So they have an indirect attachment in which the epimysium extends past the muscle as a tendon. And then we've got the direct attachment where the epimysium adheres to and fuses with the periosteum. So muscle, if it connects directly to the bone, then that's a direct attachment. And if it's indirect, it's going to use a tendon as shown in this picture. Next, we're going to get into what's called the sliding filament theory. So with your sliding filament theory, myosin cross bridges, which are small bridges on the thick filaments, extend past the thin filaments. So they attach, rotate, detach, and reattach in rapid succession. And so say for example, we've got our actin, which is our thin filament. We've got our myosin here. And what's going to happen is, as they get closer and closer together, they don't get smaller, they just overlap. And then they're going to attach, rotate, move. Attach, rotate, move. Attach, rotate, move. So it's not getting smaller, but what they're doing is they're moving closer and closer together. There's just a picture of what one sarcomere would look like. You've got your myosin heads here. So this is your myosin. This is your actin over here. And then as the muscle contracts, remember, they get closer together until they overlap. You can see here that what happens is actin has a binding site, and you can see where the you can tell where the troponin and tropomyosin are going to attach there. There's your ATP. Adenosine triphosphate stands for ATP, and it's where you get all your energy from. So there you can see the binding sites are now open, and you can see where it can attach and rotate and attach and rotate and reattach in rapid succession. Myosin cross-bridges are results in the sliding and overlapping of the actin and myosin filaments. This causes the sarcomere to contract, and therefore you have muscle contraction. At a molecular level, nerve impulses are transmitted through the muscle fiber, and they release calcium ions. So we need calcium in order for the sliding filament theory to happen. So if you have calcium in the presence of troponin and tropomyosin, that allows myosin and actin molecules to interact together. Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the energy source that allows calcium to be released. ATP detaches the myosin from the actin molecule, and then ATP must be replaced through food for the process to continue. So say this morning for breakfast you had cereal, that's your form of energy for the day, and that's how ATP is created. So here's kind of the role of calcium. You can see your sarcoplasmic reticulum, your sarcolemma, remember it's this whole outside here. Here's your myofibrils, which then turn into actin and myosin. And there you can just see the bands. We're not going to worry too much about the I band and the A band, but just know that the H zone gets smaller during contraction. I think that's all we kind of need to know. Kind of the next step that you're going to go to is taking a look at the excitation-contraction coupling reaction. And so you're going to take a look at your page in your workbook, and I will post that for you. And you're going to try and go through the sliding filament theory. Please be sure to watch all the other videos on muscles, the perimesium, the epimesium, so that you understand their layers. And then my videos that I'm going to post on the sliding filament theory. Good luck!